So years ago, David Mzee suffered an accident which left him completely paralyzed. The one-time Paralympic contender had his whole world turned upside down. But then technology came to the rescue. In a few minutes, he's about to walk across this stage. In past generations, we'd have called this next talk magic or even a miracle. And today we call it neuroscience. So let's meet the people making this possible. Please welcome BBC journalist Marianne Russon in conversation with neuroscientist Gregoire, Courtine and Jocelyne Bloch, both professors at EPFL, and of course athlete David Mzee.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Can we put up the slide, please? So I go by G. Sorry. I'm a professor of neuroscience at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology.
And I'm Jocelyne. I'm a neurosurgeon in the University Hospital of Lausanne.
And today, what we would like to do is to tell you the journey that took us to this moment, when David, tetraplegic for 9 years, was able to stand between Jocelyne and myself after the treatment that we have been developing for the past 20 years.
Before that, and before explaining you all the story, it's good if you hear David talking about his accident.
Is this the accident? Yep. Yes, many years ago.
So what happened? After this gymnastic accident, he had a contusion of the spinal cord. This means that when he gives a command to this leg, from the brain to the leg, the command is interrupted at the level of the contusion.
And you know, my first step in the field of spinal cord injury was to model this type of spinal cord injury in mice and rats. So, for example, this is one of these models. When you see the nerve fibers coming from the brain, in red, the contusion, and you can see that a subset of these nerve fibers are actually spared, but they are functionally silent because the animal is completely incapable of moving his leg, and this is permanent. However, we know that the region of the spinal cord that normally controls walking is located way below the spinal cord injury. So anatomically intact, but disconnected from the brain, and therefore in a non-functional state. Our idea, reactivate the spinal cord with electrical stimulation. Just electrode that you put on the dorsal aspect of the spinal cord, and then when you apply the stimulation to a paralyzed rat, the animal walks. Turn off the stimulation, can't walk. Back on, and immediately locomotion resumes. And on this basis, we start training the rats. You know, we develop like this new robotic system that really enabled to engage the rat in the rehabilitation program. And after a few months of training, the animal would run toward a delicious piece of Swiss chocolate that we put at the extremity of the runway.
Tell me, Gregoire, how does the rat control his legs?
So look at this video. So the rat is paralyzed. We apply the stimulation and the animal walks continuously. And then we approach our piece of Swiss chocolate. So it gets excited. You can see now how the brain is sending command to the spinal cord below the injury to activate the muscle in order to jump toward the reward. And then we remove the chocolate. The rat is frustrated. At this moment, she will actually completely block the locomotor movement. So the stimulation really amplifies the signal from the brain that apparently gets reorganized with the training. That was a very unexpected discovery, that there would be this improvement over time with the rehabilitation, suggesting the growth of new nerve connection. So we wanted to verify this finding completely unbiasedly. So for this, we have been able for the first time to render the brain and the spinal cord completely transparent. This way we can visualize all the neural pathways coming from the brain, from the brainstem, down the spinal cord all the way to this contusion that you see here in red. And what you observe, as I showed you previously, is that there is a subset of these nerve fibers that are spared. And these fibers will send new connections. This is a growth of new nerve fibers onto the region that control walking, exactly where we stimulate. So this was the more extensive reorganization of the nervous system that we ever observed. We packaged this in a publication that was broadcasted throughout the world. It was published in Science on 1st June 2012. The little rat ended up in the front page of the New York Times. And you can imagine at this moment, on one hand, the feeling of pride for a scientist, but very rapidly, the pressure on the shoulder to achieve translation. Because from a sophisticated laboratory in rats to a therapy that can help David to take a step, there is a tremendous gap. And to fill out this gap, I knew that I needed a partner in the medical field with expertise in neurosurgical medicine. This is when I met Jocelyne.
That was 2012, I remember well. He told me all this rat story, fascinating, and asked me, can we do this in human being? It was fascinating too. I wanted to do is with you, and we wanted to do it together. However, it was not so simple. We cannot use the technology used in the rats in the human being. And Gregoire, the way he told you about stimulation seems to be simple, but in reality it's a bit more complicated, because the idea is to stimulate the spinal cord at the right time, at the right place, in order to mimic the physiological activation of the spinal cord when somebody is walking. And we did not have the technology to do this in a human being. So what did you do?
Yeah, so imagine you need a neurostimulator, like a pacemaker, that you implant in the abdomen, that you need to control in real time, but wirelessly. And of course, medical grade. This did not exist, but with many discussions, we have been able to convince Medtronic, you may know the giant medtech, to allow us to crack their system. And this is a very important moment in our career. And we have like 3 engineers from my lab at the front and the engineer from Medtronic in the back. And we have the system in front of us. And for the first time, it's working. We can have a real-time control of the central nervous system wirelessly. It's a bit complicated. You have an electrode array. It's connected to this neurostimulator in the body. It communicates through the skin with electromagnetic induction. And then we build this wireless bridge with infrared, Bluetooth, etc. Anyway, a complicated chain, but at the end, with less than 100 milliseconds, you can tune multiple waves of stimulation over the human spinal cord for the first time.
And my job was to put these electrode arrays on the spinal cord of David, well located, precisely located, and to connect it to the neurostimulator that was located in the belly. So we were ready in October
2016.
Exactly. We had not slept so much before the surgery because we did not know what to expect. There was just 2 teams, the medical team on one side, the engineers on the other side. Everybody was ready. It seemed to work pretty well because we could check during the surgery that the responses that we had when we were stimulating were good and promising. But then, does this mean that the therapy is going to work? This we could only check a few days later when David was with us and he started to stand up. And remember that David could not walk, and with the stimulation on, he started doing steps. When we stop stimulation, he stops walking. When you put back stimulation, he resumes walking.
Exactly as we have seen in rats.
Exactly. So we were really happy with this. And we also wanted to check if David had the control of the leg and that it was not an automated walk, but the brain was still in control. So for that, we asked David to exaggerate steps. With the same amount of current, we asked him to do higher steps and look at what he's doing. Normal step, higher step, higher step. This means with the same amount of current he's able to exaggerate, it means that the brain has still control over the movement.
Well, she make it look easy here, but David was the first one. The first time we had no experience stimulating the human spinal cord, which was very different from the rats actually. And listen to David during the first session of configuration of the stimulation.
No, it's all amateurs here. They're just trying some stuff. They have no clue what they're doing. But they look very intelligent because they're computers, you know.
It was a lot of fun, yeah. But you know, guys, it did work.
It worked. It worked. It worked so well that David could not stop training. He came almost every day, took a lot of meters of walk, and with the training and training and training with the stimulation, one day he came with a surprise in the morning.
Listen to him.
Ready? So Gonzalo asked me how long I slept last night. I said 6 hours, but it was 5. Because I woke up and checked the toes on the left.
Pour la première fois, il est capable de bouger légèrement sa jambe paralysée, sans aucune assistance, sans aucune stimulation.
So for the first time, he's able, without stimulation, to move his left leg that was completely paralyzed for many years. So it means that the training has really helped. And it was 2 months after the training. Look at what he was able to do 6 months after the training. He was able to walk between parallel bars, and that was not an automatic passive walk with an exoskeleton. It was a really an active walk that he was able to control himself with his will and everything that he
Without
could
the stimulation.
and without the stimulation.
However, it was still much better with the stimulation. It was the same with all our participants. So they were frustrated, and they asked us, therefore, to develop an engineering framework so that they can use the stimulation outside the laboratory. So we, as a proof of concept, developed a system that they could control with a connected watch, wearable sensor attached to the feet, and then this system communicates with the implanted system to adjust the stimulation in real time. But instead of showing you the result of this type of stimulation, don't you want to see it with your own eyes? Why don't I ask David to join us on stage and show us the simulation in real time? Which chair is mine?
Go in the middle.
So here the stimulation is on, and you see he has control over the effect of the stimulation. So we don't induce the movement, we enable the control. You can sit, stand, and he has the remote control, you see, in his pocket. And now he's turning off the stimulation. The pacemaker is implanted in the abdomen. But we are lucky to have a BBC journalist with us. We will go dive into the technology because we just told you the story of David. Thank you, David.
Hi guys, I'm Marianne from BBC News Online. Let's have a round of applause first of all for Gregoire and Jocelyne of EPFL and for David Mzee, who is also an engineer with EPFL. So good afternoon guys. It was a very interesting presentation that you just made. So just like to ask you guys a few more questions. So obviously a lot of the research around this and the original operation and the proof of presentation with David Mzee actually happened in 2018. So now we're in 2021. I think it would be good to talk to you, David, about what's changed and I suppose what sort of improved and changed for you in your body since then.
Yes. So we started 2016 even with the study. So it's been a long way getting here. And yeah, some things changed. I have more control over my legs. In the beginning, I could train every day in Lausanne at EPFL and CHUV. And now, since I'm at home, I cannot train that much, but I still see progress. The only thing is it's like watching your own hair grow. You don't see a difference from day to day. But if somebody sees you after a year, they'll be like, oh, your hair is long now. And that's what it feels like.
So, I mean, obviously this all sounds like, quite sci-fi, the idea of being a cyborg, having like things implanted. What does it, for us in the general public to sort of understand from a non-scientific perspective, what is it like? Do you feel, what is it like in your body? Do you feel or sense anything? Do you feel like there's an implant in there? What is it like?
Well, if you turn up the amplitude of the stimulation, you can feel this tingling sensation, because it's on the part of the spinal cord where the sensory input is actually transported. So that induces a reflex that gets my legs moving. So in the beginning it was really strange, because before the muscles start twitching, you can feel this tingling sensation. And after some time, you just get used to it and it feels good.
So I kind of want to open up the discussion now to include Gregoire and Jocelyne. So obviously we've been hearing a lot in recent years, and there's been a lot, we hear more of it from a breakthrough perspective. When people are able to when scientists are able to make paraplegics walk, that becomes like a breaking news story, and then we don't hear about it for a while. But obviously there's different theories. So you guys use a spinal implant, but other people have done something different. They're doing exoskeletons. Medical exoskeletons are also quite interesting and popular. So can you tell us for a sort of general audience, what is the difference between the two and why the implant is preferable?
I mean, they could also be synergistic. I don't think they're exclusive from each other, but clearly having an implant connected to an iPhone is much easier to use for someone with spinal cord injury. Imagine if David can just click on a watch or talk to his watch, steam on, can stand, can walk, etc.
So it's a turn off, turn on thing. You can choose when you want to have it on and when you want to have it off.
That's right.
Okay.
That's just what he did with the remote control. You turn it on and off. And an exoskeleton is very difficult to wear. It takes a long time to put it on. It takes a lot of effort. I don't think it's a natural working. And above all, it's very passive. The exoskeleton moves your legs passively. In the case of David, is a full activation of the neuromuscular system. And the consequence of this is what we call activity-dependent reorganization of the nervous system. The reason why David recovered control over paralyzed muscles is because there's growth of new connection, which you would never see with an exoskeleton. So this is, for us, especially Jocelyne being a medical doctor, the ultimate grail, the neurological recovery. The dream is for David to remove this implant and be normal. We are far from this, but this is our ultimate goal with this type of technology and approach.
So since 2018, if you look at, I'm guessing you've continued to collect data with David, what have you seen? If you were to sort of like represent that in like a graph, what would it look like?
So David was the first participant. We've implanted other participants. It's still at a level of research. So it's not that we can implant thousands of people, but we've already implanted 9 patients, and they all kind of follow the same path. They all had a bit different lesions, lesion sites, lesion severity, but they could all benefit from the therapy. And also what we see from our point of view is as we're learning, we are still in a learning curve, and we are getting better. Also to stimulate how to approach the therapy, and this is something, I think it's at the beginning of the slope, and before it becomes a therapy for everyone, it will still last a little bit, but I think I have good hope that it will happen quite soon.
Has it taught you anything very interesting? Because obviously a lot of this is about seeing new neural pathways and new connections being made. Have you guys learned anything very interesting or unique in the last 3 years about that? Because obviously it was quite a breakthrough when you announced it in 2018. But are you seeing the pathways strengthen over time or new ones be created? Is there anything that you've seen like that you can talk about?
That's a really good question, actually. I'm glad you're asking, because often people forget all the mechanism, which is my daily life in a way. And indeed, what we have been able to discover the past 3 years is a very unique type of neurons in the spinal cord that is activated by the pathway that we recruit with the stimulation, what David said, the reflex pathway. And this neuron is the key neuron that enables the recovery of walking. So we have been able to discover that there is a unique population of neurons that we can now manipulate, regrow, in order to further enhance the recovery. Super exciting.
So I think also you were discussing with me previously that actually, a lot of growth has been happening, and obviously a lot of technologies, they're often born out of universities, and eventually they become spun off into startups. And I do believe that yours recently went to IPO. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that was Jocelyne's idea almost in 2014 to say, proof of concept in human is great, but we'll never be able to scale it up to make it a therapy across the world. And she said, we have to create a startup. So we launched into this journey, which ended up indeed with last month an IPO at Euronext. And onward is now developing technology so that it becomes, as I said, very easy with connected watch, with optimized stimulator, optimized electrode array, so that it becomes a commonly available therapy across the world. And this is ongoing for the next 2-3 years.
The technology that we have been using until now was a technology made for pain treatment. So we've adapted it for therapy of David or other people like him. But the reason of this startup was to do dedicated devices, not pain treatment, but dedicated for rehabilitation.
And are these being tested at any other hospitals around the world?
They will be tested. They're not yet.
So watch
they
this
will
space.
be tested. They will be
Okay.
tested.
So I think I also wanted to talk, David was telling me backstage that he's actually tried out some of these sort of exoskeletons, and you have an engineering background. So what is your so you have the first-hand experience. What is it like to use an exoskeleton, and how does that differ from the implant?
Well, actually, I wanted to do my master thesis on exoskeletons. I did another one in the end, but it was really interesting to dive into that field. And I've tested a few exoskeletons. One thing that must be said that is in favor of the exoskeletons is for sure it's non-invasive. So you don't need to operate and cut your body open. So that's an advantage. But as Gregoire said, the effect that it has is not that huge.
Is it heavy? Is it heavy to
I
feel it?
tried one that was rather light, another one that was really heavy. So it depends on the exoskeleton. But it's really cumbersome to even get it on. And just talking to your watch is definitely easier.
So do you feel a bit like RoboCop when you have to put on the exoskeleton?
Absolutely, yeah. At first it feels strange, then you get used to it, it feels cool, and after some time it's like, it's not really doing what you want. So I as much as I like them, I didn't really enjoy them that much.
So I've got one last question for all three of you. So obviously brain-machine interfaces and the idea of putting implants is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. You guys may have seen all of Elon Musk's sort of plans and talking about that. But I guess we're asking the real doctors and scientists, where do you think we have a space for this? Because Elon Musk sort of envisions brain-machine sort of interfaces as almost like a for fun thing where you would communicate with your computer. People have talked about putting their memories from their brain straight into the cloud. Or do you think that it's has its place more on the medical field?
So in 2016, we published a paper in non-human primates in which we connected the brain, so the thought of the animals, to the stimulator, the exact same stimulator that David has in his body. It was to validate actually the stimulator. And the animal, by just thinking about walking, was able to control the movement of his leg. The next fascinating step for us, of course, is to do the same in human. That's indeed what Elon Musk advertised. And maybe we give you a meeting next year to see a brain-spine interface enabling someone paralyzed to walk again on this stage.
So you think it has got a place in both medical and non-medical use?
I personally believe that it's primarily for medical use at this stage.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to Gregoire, Jocelyne, and David Mzee from EPFL.
Thank you.